The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I have found my head turned and my heart caught by the transformative glimpse of God I have experienced through Christian community. Like the 2 disciples, I have felt this glimpse feed a deeper curiosity, prompting me to follow and ultimately be invited to come and see. To this end, this 2023, I am embarking on a 6-month journey to dwell with various Christian communities. On the way, I'll be sharing interviews with community members, founders, and leaders to learn more about the blessings, challenges, and wisdom these dwelling places of God hold. In doing so, I hope to inform how it is we might nurture people and communities to be transformative manifestations of God, offering a glimpse of the divine and inviting people to come and see God's loving dwelling place.
I'm Ruth. So I joined in 2015. I was a student at Durham from 2012, studied archaeology, and then at the end of that really knew I wanted to stay in Durham. But maybe Durham was a hard place to stay as a graduate. Like not many of my friends were staying, and I knew I wanted to have community. Yeah. So I kind of heard about Achor, prayed about it, felt like prompted to consider it, and then it felt like a really good step, I think, joining. I really enjoyed those early years of being in Achor. And definitely, I think when I joined, I'm like young, 20-something, like full of passion and energy. Yeah. Got a lot done, you know. Yeah. But then I guess over time, as you get to know the community more, as you settle, as you put those roots down, it definitely is like a bit of a change of pace, I've noticed. And a lot more, I think maybe when I was younger, I had like these high ideals of what community would be. And then as I've got older, I've come with like just an acceptance of the reality, which I think is really healthy because it takes a lot of pressure off everyone and yourself. So I think I've definitely been on a journey with it. I'm happy to share more about the joys and challenges of that. But and what have I done? When I joined Achor, I worked part-time as an archaeologist and part-time for the church as the Achor coordinator, and then moved into increasing my hours coordinating the outreach. And then during COVID, I stopped doing that and then picked up a role in the NHS, which I do to this day, supporting patients with non-medical stuff and helping them access community groups and things like that, which I really enjoy. And I'm a mum and a wife, so it's good.
And Ian?
I moved to Durham from Birmingham in 2017 to study chemistry. I did that for 4 years and got to the end of it and definitely knew I didn't want to do chemistry anymore. During my degree, through various things that church did, particularly like June Project, which was this week that of mission that we do every year in June. It works quite well because the students have a few weeks after exams before their results where they all stick around. So rather than just partying, we get out and do lots of mission and social engagement in the city. And I got involved in a team going into prisons during that time and stayed doing prison ministry and got particularly interested in, and passionate about doing ministry with people on margins of society. I think another factor that comes into it before I say how I joined Achor was then COVID happened in my penultimate year of my degree, and I think that was a big point of recognition that community is important, and like sometimes you have to be more intentional about community to receive it. And perhaps for me, I felt like what I had access to in terms of community in church, not being part of Achor, wasn't exactly what I desired or felt would be healthy for me. I think particularly because like early in lockdown, I stayed in Durham and most of the other students went back. So I was one of the kind of only people around, and I had like a couple of friends who like did various things like bubbling together and things like that. But yeah, I think there was that realisation that I wanted to kind of go deeper in community and living with Christians. And I came to probably a bit before this time, 3 years ago it would have been, and was considering what to do and wanted to carry on doing ministry of people on the margins and going into prisons. So decided to do training with Kings, with that as kind of a focus area, and thought joining Achor would tap into the sides of the desire for community, but also doing outreach in areas and with demographics who don't tend to be in our church on a Sunday.
Thank you. And in your introductions, some of what the Achor community is about comes across, but would you mind giving a bit of an overview of the Achor community and what it does? That would be great.
Do you want to go first? Me. So we're the Achor Community. That is from a verse in Hosea where it says the Lord would turn the valley of Achor into a doorway of hope. So it's all about a place that's kind of known for trouble or challenge being transformed into a place of hope, which is, I guess, our prayer for the estate. Although sometimes you have to get in trouble when people from the estate's like, why is it called Achor? And I'm like, it's not about. I'm like, it's about hope. So it's been running since like 2013. Achor began. I joined in 2015. It started quite small. I think there was 4 to 6 people in the first 2 years, just like getting to know people. I don't think we did much. We just did a lot of relationship building. And then in the year I joined, there was about 8 of us, I think, who joined. So we really went from, like, I think there were 4 originals and 8 new. So that was a big shift.
Did you have the house? Did the church have the house at that point, or was it just someone volunteering at the house?
Yeah, well, I think Achor came to be because the church had been running this Dream Project week mission on the estate for, I think, probably about 10 years before they landed the house there. Or maybe not quite 10 years, but for a number of years. They've always done outreach. Yeah, like working with the community centre, running groups and stuff there. And then I think the church leaders felt like, we shouldn't be going in and out. We should be going in and staying and being part of the community if we really want to reach it. So they, I think, applied for different grants, bought the house that Ian now lives in. I think most of us have lived in at some point. And that's on the top estate. So the estate is split into 2, the top estate and the bottom estate. So we're on the bottom estate here. So when we started, we were just on the top estate between that house and a house that we rent off. All these houses are rented off for social housing. So we write to the housing provider and tell them what we're doing, and then they let us rent their houses, which they took a lot of work. Like when I say, like, you should have seen this house before we had it, it was just a shell, like there was a lot of work that had to be done to make them really livable.
So that was the church reaching out to these social housing companies? Yeah,
that's right, just saying, like, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to be like a positive presence. We're trying to build social cohesion. We're trying to work with local partners. They're a team of committed volunteers. Could we house them? So then we had 2 houses on the top estate, and then in the year I moved in, 2 years later, we started on the bottom estate as well. And since then I've kind of roughly had maybe like 2 or 3 houses on the top estate, and always had 2 on the bottom estate. But there's more on the top estate just because there's a row of private houses. So for those who maybe want to buy or just be a bit more rooted, they've got that option too. So there's a couple of houses on there and that people own.
Yeah, and practically then, in terms of the rent, does that just come out of the volunteers? So the community that I lived in, we were volunteers for the community, but we all paid our own rent, which just kept it going. Is that the same here, or...? Yeah,
I think financially everyone's responsible for their own rent. I know in previous years this might be before you, Ian, but like when there was big discrepancies, like for example, the social housing rent's obviously cheaper than the private rent, and at one point this house was being shared by 4 boys, so they must have been paying like 20 quid a week in rent. It was a joke. So we, I remember for a few years we had this thing called rent equality. Well, I'm not sure anything ever happened to it, but we were really considering it as a community, like how do we balance this out? But yeah, I think when we were kind of chewing that over, I think the leaders, like when we talked it through with Kings, I think they were very much like, consider your giving as part of like, think about how much you'd want for like rent plus giving, and then adjust your giving like accordingly. So maybe if you're paying less rent, you might want to give more, but if you're paying more rent, you'd give less. So it kind of does balance in a way, but we haven't really, you know, it's not equal.
It's not being formalised or
and it's not
documented.
No.
And you live in a house which the church owns?
Yes.
Yeah, and with other people?
Yes, there's 3 of us. So I guess part of the story of Achor is that it started out with people who were mainly coming out of being students, so were single and just out of university and living in kind of shared housing that you might at that life stage. And then as it's gone on, people have got married, started to have families and spread out and lived in those. But the house I'm in is of 3 of us who are single guys.
Yes, there's like a mix of shared houses and not shared houses. I guess over time the proportion has changed. But now there's 2 shared houses, aren't there? 2 girls in one and 3 boys in the other. And then the rest of us, like family units in other houses.
Yeah. And in terms of people wanting to join the community, can anyone express interest and join? Is it very much seen as like a discernment process? Do you have to apply?
Yeah.
I did it
So
more
you did it
recently.
more recently,
I'm guessing it's probably like been chopped and changed over the years, because I think there have been people I'd say the majority of people were part of King's, probably students, and then at some point when they were students joined. But I think there have been people who've joined. Have people come in and joined straight away? I think maybe in the early years. Yeah.
A lady from the estate joined us for a year or 2. Yeah, most people tend to be like connected to Kings in a way, so that's kind of first you're part of Kings, then you're maybe part of a cell group, and then if you're exploring it more. But there's like an application process. They'd encourage you to be volunteering in one of our projects or coming along to an Achor meal. So we eat together once a week. So they'd encourage you to attend that. And prayer. And then there'd be like a more formal interview where 2 Achor members would interview the person, and then they would feed back to the community, and then it's kind of as a community, if you've got any red flags, you'd basically raise it with the leader and it'd go from there. But here we are.
Yeah.
So we weren't red flagged.
There was quite a long set of questions which I found helpful for discerning myself. I imagine it was also helpful for
that's true.
the people to do it, and things like the interview, it wasn't like a job interview. It was definitely more about considering
are we a good fit kind of interview.
The questions fitting into it and realising what you're getting into, because I guess we have a kind of, you sign up as a commitment for 2 years,
2 years, cool.
potentially expanding to more, which is quite big for people who've just come out of being students and don't really know whether they're going to be able to find jobs and work up in this part of the country.
I'd love to see those questions.
We should find them.
You should probably find.
There were some, they were really helpful. I remember the ones, and they're like, how can your community help you when you're feeling stressed? Or so it was very much like a kind of 2-way, like just helping you think through, like, is this right for you? And are they right? Like, will this all work? And also, because our estate, I don't know, we shared a little bit, but we're in the top 5% of deprived neighbourhoods nationally. So there is quite a high level of need here, and you do come across quite challenging situations. So actually there's a whole chunk on there about kind of resilience in terms of not just your inward life, which is one challenge, but thinking actually about where we're choosing to live and the challenges that will just bring by living here, and whether you've kind of got the experience boundaries, just like whether you're up for embracing the kind of challenge of living on the margins. So I found that was probably the most helpful section for me, I think, when I did it, because it really makes you consider, like, what will it be like living on the estate, and how do I do this well?
And actually, I forgot to ask around recruitment. Do you actively recruit, or is it just a case of the community just naturally grows and diminishes, and that's fine because you can stop renting the house?
Yeah. Depends. There's been times where it's been very natural, just like people interested and they join, but there's been times when we're like, especially with the shared houses, when you're like, right, like when Dylan, there's a guy called Dylan who'd like committed to being part of Achor. No, Alistair, other way around, who'd like committed to being part of Achor, and we really needed a housemate for him, otherwise he'd be living in like a 4-bedroom house by himself. So we were really at that point like praying and like, you know, every week at church, anyone interested in being part of the Achor community? And luckily the fabulous Dylan was really keen. He's one of our leaders now. Yeah. He's fabulous. So yeah, there have been times where we've needed to recruit, but I don't think, unless there's like a specific need, we're just quite chill. Yeah, I think.
And yeah, there's that element where it's like, we don't want people to join to, like, because they're trying to fill, like...
It's not right for them. Yeah, then we'll all regret it in 2 years' time. Yeah, that's so true, Ian.
And you mentioned meals and prayer. How do those rhythms work?
I guess at them it changes and adapts depending on people's life circumstances. Particularly when we had children become part of the community, we had to adapt around
we ruin everything.
bedtimes and nap times.
We're like, sorry, baby's sleeping.
So at the moment,
the rhythms serve us. We don't serve the rhythms.
Yes.
Yeah. At the moment, we pray twice a week on Monday evenings and Friday mornings, which is just for half an hour meeting in one of the different houses. We try and have one on this estate and one on the top estate. And then we have a meal on Thursday evenings. So I guess one of the things when you join is an expectation to have those Thursday evenings blocked out to be able to attend that meal.
Does that rotate between the different houses? Do you take it?
Yes. Now it definitely rotates around who cooks, but with kids and
we tend to like host if we've got the kids. But yeah, there's often Libby, who organises the rota, is a queen of organisation, so she's got this incredibly complicated... Well, it's not complicated. It looks complicated, but to her, it's simple. But we meet...
like me.
Oh, yeah, you'd love it. So I think we eat all together once a month, and after that we have like a team time, which is like our monthly meeting where we, work through any things that we have. Need to talk through as a community. And then once every 3 months we just started doing like a strategic team time, so like the bigger questions which we actually can't really tackle in an hour, we can set some time aside and work through them. And then we have a girls boys night, that's this week, and then we have just like combinations of different households together with the other ones.
So that in the course of a month or two you've eaten with
everyone
in a variety of different combinations.
So it does work really well.
So are there any, because how many are there of you in total?
11 adults, 2 babies and a dog.
So
that does work.
That's really nice.
And there's the other rhythm we have, is Cellar Breakfast, which is this Saturday. So first Saturday of the month, we like block out the morning, and we used to have like a prayer and praise evening on a Friday night, but we were all just too tired, I think. So now we have like brunch together, and then we just have a prayer and worship hour, which just gives us a bit longer to pray, because I guess the half an hour can sometimes feel quite rushed.
And the emphasis is more thanksgiving rather than petition, in terms of like when we come to our Monday and Fridays, it's about praying about things we're aware of on the estate and themes, interceding into those, whereas the Saturday morning is a time to say what testimonies are there that we have to be thankful for God. How's God been at work in our lives and in the lives of people on the estate? Which, when we started it, I thought was just, and it still is great, but I guess we're a bit more used to it, but it definitely felt like a very exciting thing to gather together and share these testimonies that otherwise you might not have heard, or I guess hearing it out of someone's mouth is a lot more exciting than a message typed out on the chat.
A message on Facebook.
Yeah. And then do you feel like the prayer has evolved? Do you quite naturally find a way of praying together, given that you're all from Kings, or have you found that the type of prayer has
Definitely done different things over the years. Like we used to use the Book of Common Prayer quite a lot, and that was really helpful. We used to, like when I joined, it was prayer like 4 mornings a week, so we used to pray a lot more. But then we used to have way less commitments outside Achor, so now it feels like I don't quite know how we did it. We had so much energy. I don't know what we were doing. Like I just feel exhausted when I look back. But we used that a lot back then, and we've had times where we've like written our own liturgy as well. I remember I think I took that on for a year, maybe my second year in terms of writing our own. But now we just kind of, it depends like what the vibe is. We tend to just find our way. It's like probably a bit different every year, but
I think last year we were maybe a bit more, we flipped between like how freeform and the church and guide that is, and at the moment I think we're sat in a kind of
like little middle niche,
so where we have a bit of a reading from Celtic Daily Prayer.
I love that book.
And then that includes a Bible reading, and then we pray prayers of thanks, and then
the PRA
have kind of intercession with particular themes. But there was a time, I don't know if it still exists, we used to have like a push list of pray until something happens about a bunch of
we've done those different things.
It just varies.
Like things that just feel really heavy that you just keep picking up and praying again. So we had that list, so we were kind of kept coming back to those things and we won't forget anything. But at the moment we just like we have 2 prayer coordinators in our community, and every week they just send us like, these are what we're praying into this week. So this week we're praying for like June Project and cost of living, and I think that's working like quite well, isn't it? I'm enjoying our rhythm at the moment, but likely in a year we'll have evolved onto something new. But and
you've touched on this already, but would you mind restating the different rhythms you have in terms of the different groups that you have in a week?
I guess it's helpful to say, as to kind of summarise missional community in general, I don't think it's original to us. I think someone wrote it in a book somewhere and we've taken it, but we have the like inward, outward and upward rhythms of inward is like internal community things we were just talking about. Upward is our own personal devotions, but also our together kind of worship of God's. So that might be the prayer times or celebrate breakfast, but also that we are part of church, that we find time in our weeks to spend with God ourselves. And then we have outward, which I guess might be different to some of the other communities, or look different to some of the other communities you've had, where they might have the inward and upward, but the outward is definitely an addition to that. And in a week we would, I'm trying to run through each day then. On a Monday I don't think there's anything. On the Tuesday we have this toddler group that we set up recently in partnership with one of the community centres. On a Wednesday
we have 2 new believer cells, so on the night like people from the estate who've kind of come to faith and have committed to King's as their church, we have like quite accessible cell groups for them, so one is with kids and one's without kids, so that happens on a night. Thursday
we have the lunch club that we were talking about earlier at the other community centre, mainly for elderly people, which I guess is kind of one of our focuses has been on outreach to the isolated and elderly. And we also have started running a sports club on the afternoons on the fields near where our house is on top of state for kids in the local area to come along, where we also have a kind of opportunity for a quick Bible thought there as well. Is that Thursday? And then we have the Achor meal on the Thursday, but that's obviously internal. Fridays, women's breakfast, which Ruth has been involved in.
And then beyond that, there's like the befriending scheme. So kind of that's where Lunch Club came out of. So some of us in Achor volunteer on it, and we are matched with people who are elderly or isolated, and we visit them regularly or just chat with them. So that kind of is ongoing alongside, we do this like festival church thing maybe once a term, once a quarter, once a festival. So like maybe at Christmas we do a Christingle, at Easter we did an Easter celebration, just making the most of the points in the calendar where we can bring people together off the estate and do like a more churchy thing. And the last one was this weekend. It was awesome. It's the best one we've ever done. It was so good. So really, really encouraging.
And in terms to reaching out to people? Is that a case of knocking on doors? Is it a case of relationships which just date back like 10 years, in which...
A lot of it's established relationships, I think, isn't it? So, for example, the befriending scheme, for example, like our local GP surgery will refer into it. So they're all like quite formalised projects that external people can access very easily. We did a lot of door knocking in the early days, but we don't really do that anymore. I think a lot of it is just our networks as we've grown. And we've kind of been working on, I guess, our vision as Achor in terms of what we do and like who we are. But like we talk a lot about like the projects, I guess, that we've discussed, just relationships with people, like our neighbours, prayer, which again we've discussed, and also just presence. Like a lot of what we try and do is just be really present to our estate. And I think that's just like... Well, I'm maybe biased, but I think it's just like one of the most important things we do. Like if I'm out in the garden playing with Bobby, and then like our neighbour, it happened the other week, like went out crying, and I could just catch her and say like, oh my gosh, how can I like be with you in this moment, and then like have a cup of tea with her this week and follow that up. And like so much about what we do is that, and then from that it might be like, oh, actually I go to this women's group where there's other mums, I know you're feeling a bit lonely, shall we connect in, do you want to come with me? And so that's kind of how we build those connections, really. I think through being present.
And across the 11 of you kind of each participate in the different kind of outreach projects?
Yeah, to varying degrees. Some people are like very involved, some people don't really do any, and maybe would be more focused on the prayer or the presence, or
and probably were more involved at different life stages.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think as we've gone on and got older as a community, I think we're so aware of just different seasons bring different capacities. And actually it's really okay that if like you used to do a lot, but now actually job's really stressful and you've got a kid or whatever is going on, or your mental health is really poor at the moment, and actually like just accepting the seasons that we're in and being really kind to each other and managing our expectations, and knowing that actually things will change again in a year or two, and that's okay. So I think accepting that and making the most of it too, that's really helpful, Ian.
And in terms of the staffing, so King's Church is a church which has staff, and how much of the community is staffed in terms of the finances of it?
Yeah, so I used to hold the Achor coordinator role for a few years. So we've got an Achor coordinator whose role is like the projects. So in terms of like inward life and stuff like that, that's not really their responsibility. Their responsibility is they're mostly actually funded by grant funding, maybe from the council, but their main focus is delivery of befriending scheme, lunch club, partnership projects, and it's between 1 or 2 days a week at the moment.
It's higher now.
Is it higher now? Oh, that's so good. Well, it's higher now. There we go. We learned
it's
something
at least 20 hours now.
Oh, brilliant. So that's great. And then we have an Achor chaplain who is 4 hours a week, who is there to attend to spiritual meals, and maybe doing some one-to-one as well, with like new believers on the estate. And then we have Achor leaders who are unpaid and elected by us as a community to just help oversee the smooth running. We used to do everything by committee for about 7 years, and then we went slightly loopy with it and realised, you know what, we waste so much time talking about things and no one has the authority just to say, that's a great decision, most of us are in favour, let's do it. But so we leaders came from that. So we have at the moment 3 leaders, but again that might change in the future, and we'll just go with the flow. So they're responsible for like our inward life, but they all work together, they meet together like and communicate regularly. So it's quite collaborative.
And I guess the nature of when people often join, like I'm training for church and have time in my training to do some of the outreach parts that we do, and I think there's probably been someone in that situation most of the time that we've had the community, which
that's true.
I think is quite beneficial for
very
because everyone else is working or studying and
so most of us hold full or part-time jobs outside or full-time parenting.
And then I know to start thinking about lessons or challenges or wisdom that you would pass on. I won't leave it as a vague question, but then you can share what comes to mind.
I'm happy to start because I think the biggest, I guess maybe specifically think about Achor Community, the biggest lesson I think I've learned, I've already mentioned it, but like coming into it being like really, maybe like activisty, idealist, like, oh, let's do this amazing, it's going to be so. But like reading Bonhoeffer's Life Together I found so helpful, and he talks there about like how your expectation on a community will destroy the community because you're crushing it and it's not reality. And I think so much as I've gone on in Achor, I'm really grateful for the lesson of just like accepting what is, and accepting like Ian's not my community member that I have expectations on. He's like Ian and he's my friend and my brother, and you know, all of that. And it changes how you see it then, I think. So I think that's definitely a journey I've been on and still am on, I think. And it really just helps you not feel bitterness towards other people, or not feel like frustrated, like, oh, why isn't this person doing more? Or I found that really helpful, letting go of expectation, accepting reality, and trying to embrace that, definitely. And I hope people do the same towards me. But yeah.
I think a lot of the points of tension are where there's like two things in play that maybe they are in tension in some ways, and because I've been studying Ecclesiastes today, I've learned to... Is
it meaningless, Ian?
Well, no, it's more that like actually points of tension are helpful for us to, and healthy for us to live in points of tension. So like being missional and a community can sometimes be something that where do we place ourselves? What are people joining? What are people's focuses? Because like naturally you'll have some people join and they might have the preference more for the missional side, and other people might join whose preference is more towards the community aspects, and we only have so much time between all of us, and it's how do we balance all these things, and we want to commit and keep to running the stuff that we've involved in, which is outward, but we also need to make time internally to be well invested in getting to know each other. I think that's one of the places, and the other, like, I think it's really helpful for you at the beginning to be like, oh, it's great for being involved in a wider church, because I think there are tensions between the two, in that our church is a community and then we're a subset of a community from within that community, and the capacity we might feel towards and the way we relate to the other people in church can sometimes feel like a bit of a tension, as well as the what our church looks like on a Sunday might not be what we would like most for people in this area to be coming along to church. And there are tensions in how we, who are all very passionate about this particular area and thing that we're doing in church life, aren't everyone in the wider church, and they have their different passions and interests, and that's definitely a point of tension.
Yeah. I think another thing I've been struck by as well is just like, I'm really grateful for Achor in terms of the long-term perspective that it has, and like although over the years like people have come and gone, and you know some people come, maybe got like a 5-year shift and then leave, or they might just do 1 year and then they're off again, but like Achor as a thing keeps going, and like I think it's the message often say like is it like you'll be disappointed in what you see in like 1 year, but in 5 you'll be like excited about what you see in 5 years. And I think like maybe as well just being here longer, maybe the fruit feels like more hard won, or you've like waited longer for it, so it's like better when it finally comes. But I think just I'm really grateful for the longevity of Achor, and I guess I'm coming up to 8 years, and having known like some young people, like, you know, from when they were little, and now they're like parents of their own, and they're they've got their little ones and they're smashing it, and you're just like journeying with them now as a mum, when you used to like mentor them in youth group. That's true of one of the mums who comes to our women's group, and she's like just really going for it in her faith at the moment, and it's just so much better for having done it with her as a young person, which is if I just joined Achor now, I'd be like, oh, it's cool to have this relationship, but having done the journey, it makes it so much richer. So I'm definitely like encouraged by the long-term aspect of it.
And because another kind of question I have when thinking about community is the sustainability piece, and like the whole burnout thing as well. And the community that I was part of in Cambridge, people commit to a year. Quite a few of us do 2 years, like a few people done 3 years, but otherwise it's doesn't lend itself to be much longer than that, just because you're working or studying full time and doing community stuff on top of it, and it gets quite tiring. But as someone who's been there longer, how do you feel about the sustainability of it, or like your energy for it?
Yeah, I think Achor feels sustainable. Like it really does. I feel like it does feel doable, you know. And I think I'm not sure why. I wonder if it's because we're not. I know I mentioned it earlier, but like the rhythms serve us. So like things do change and evolve, and like if it was feeling like a struggle, like for example, like I only attend one of the 2 prayer meetings because the other one doesn't work for me, and that's okay. There's like that acceptance there, so you can kind of work out what works for you in terms of that. So that definitely helps. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something maybe about having our own space. I think that really helps. I think if you're, I don't know, like renting from the social housing is very secure. Like you're not in any risk of, you know, like an insecure housing tenancy, which is really good. I don't know what makes it sustainable, Ian.
How long have you been here, Ian?
I think it's about 20 months. I joined in July of 2021. I think it is, like, I think to some extent it is because, like, I don't know if it started off feeling very sustainable, but people have chosen to stick with it and actually properly establish roots here, which then means that there is a sense where now it feels more rooted than when you're joining into something that's already rooted there.
That's really helpful. I wonder as well then, maybe as we are more rooted, maybe actually what makes it feel more sustainable is it's not that I'm giving all the time. Like I genuinely take from this estate as much as I give. Like my neighbour put around the other day with like baby clothes for us, and like we're so well loved here, and looked like it's not like I'm just here to give and give and give and I'm running dry. It's like I'm taking in from my Achor community, but I'm also taking in from the estate, and so well supported at like the toddler group we run, like just getting alongside all the mums and parenting together, and like it's not just like we're giving all we're not just pouring out all the time. I think there's definitely like it's more balanced, which I think makes it feel sustainable.
I remember just popping around to visit someone who lives on the estate who life can sometimes be all over the place to see how they were doing, and like was chatting to them and picking up all kinds of things, and then suddenly she looks at my feet and was like, "Oh, do you need some trainers?" And like I kind of did, because like I didn't have a lot of money and my shoes kept getting wet because it was just raining all the time, and
Classic
she was
problems.
like, "Oh, here's some shoes from my neighbour, who I think earlier in the conversation she said was a drug dealer, and the only problem that he had with them was because like the tick of the logo was peeling off it," and I was like, "Great, I'll take these pretty much brand new."
Wow. Have you not got wanted shoes now hanging walking around the estate? People yeah. But it does feel sustainable, doesn't it? Well, it does for me anyway.
And that's also when thinking about working on the margins, and maybe this is more applicable to when it was a new community. How is it that you integrate as a community coming from potentially a very different background to the people that you're living with on the estate? And I don't know whether was that an issue in the early days, or is it something that you feel coming into it at a later stage? Or...
I think maybe we felt it more at the beginning. So I remember people used to be like, "Oh, it's the students." I'm not a student. I've not been a student for years. But now I think as time goes on, people don't see that you like that anymore, especially when your neighbours change and all of a sudden you're the old ones on the street. But yeah, I think there's something about like an attitude of wanting to learn from our neighbours. Like I think if you go in, like we've got all the answers, here we are, like we've come to save the estate, you're not going to get very far. I think there's a lot from like, wanting to like co-design projects with people, wanting to empower other people to lead. It's about getting alongside people, I think. And I think...
I think like when we start things up, we do try to prayerfully discern what needs them might be, rather than just being like, oh, if we ran this project, it would be like have some kind of vision of, oh, it's going to lead to loads of people becoming Christians or massively changing the situation, but actually looking at what are the needs on the estate and how are they being fulfilled by other places, and how can we get along and support who's already doing that, or is there a need for us to start something there, and having conversations with the community centres and other groups before we start something, so that we're not just like coming in and suddenly starting a new project and then finding out that something very similar is already being done here. And I think something, I probably haven't been here long enough to observe it, but something I've heard from here, but also other, like, I think it was like Eden, which is the missional communities network of the Message Trust, saying that so often in the communities they're part of, a charity or the council or someone will come in with some kind of project because they got some kind of funding, and for reasons of, oh, it's actually a lot more difficult to run this in this area, and like sometimes you face quite a lot of hostilities, or the funding runs out, they stop it. And here, in what we're doing, like, because we think hard about it, there's that level of like, we don't want to be dropping these projects or these causes.
I think because we live here as well, like our neighbours don't see us as people just like coming in to run projects and then leaving. We're their neighbours to them. And I think living here has given us more, not authority, that's the wrong word, but do you know what I mean? Like, I think people not respect it. It's a different dynamic if you're like a student or an ex-student coming in and then leaving. But
I think
when you live there,
there are elements in which we are still different because we've come from different backgrounds, and because we're Christians and have different rhythms. Like something like eating together around a table feels like very natural to us, but our experience of getting other people into like that kind of hospitality thing, like actually, like that's very difficult. Like going to your neighbour and inviting them round next Tuesday for a meal.
That's so different.
Doesn't work.
Yeah. Or if I said to my neighbour, oh, can you come around like a week on Tuesday when I've got a bit of free time for coffee? That's just not the Sherburn Road way. Like the Sherburn way is you rock up, you stay for hours and hours till you're like, please leave because I've got so much I need to do. But it's just like culturally very different. But we can learn from that, I think, as well. 'Cause like this is such a welcoming place, and this community has been so welcoming to us. And I don't think we've ever had anything but like kindness, and well, I'm sure we have, but like on the whole, like we're really warmly welcomed here.
Yeah, and I think it's gradually as you become more and more immersed that you start to feel, whenever you're doing something that's across a big cultural boundary of some type, is as you feel more immersed, you start to feel more comfortable associating with it and feeling more part of it, which I guess is why we want people to be established here for a longer term, because like especially in my first year it just felt like a lot of lessons to be learned, and like it was only then at the end of it where there was something where I was like, oh, I think there's actually a need here, and we are equipped enough to start something to do something about that need. But the whole first year I definitely wasn't in the place where we'd actually be able to start something sustainable and
I feel the same about my experience community as well. It kind of takes you a year to
settle in, definitely.
Get to know people.
Maybe that's another thing on sustainability, actually. One of the challenges, I think, of what would make us not sustainable in terms of staying, I think one of the things I find hardest is like the change every year, because 2 years isn't a long time. And actually the people we've had through, every time new people join, you kind of are like, right, here you go. You have to kind of like find it in you to be like, right, here I go again, to make a close connection with someone who might leave me. And that's really hard. Like, I think I definitely, as the years go on, I think that's something I find every transition I find harder, I think. Especially when people leave, it's just like heartbreaking now. And then when people join, I'm like, I have nothing left to give you. The other people broke me. But I think like genuinely that might be one of the hardest points in terms of like seeing myself here longer term. Like how many more churns do I have in me? I don't know. Like that might be one of the challenges I see. And it makes sense because I think some communities ask for like a 5-year commitment, or I think that'd be too much for our context. But I see why they do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then at least you know you've got years to work through the storming, norming, performing kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to get that's right. It's different contexts.
Yeah.
And that's a really point. Yeah, and then when we were talking about just applying and the questions, you talked about resilience and boundaries, which I can imagine are really important in this context. So what have you learnt about resilience and boundaries living and volunteering on the estate?
I think last year I learnt, which is probably just a life skill we should do more, try not to compare myself too much to other people and what their involvement is. I think particularly because I was doing training with Kings and had so many hours a week which was allotted towards doing outreach and projects on the estate, then because there are people who work full-time jobs and then might go out and do outreach and that kind of thing, I was just like, I feel like on my Saturday I need to still go out and do something. And I was just realising that was Saturday is the only day I have completely off work. And for me, doing that on a Saturday, I needed to stop from doing that and take a day off from that. And that required me to put some boundaries in place into saying what I'd be involved in. And for me, practically, I'm happy to do plenty of internal community stuff there, but the external outreach things felt too similar to work, and I needed a break from work. But then for the people who spend their days doing a job very distinct to what they do here, a Saturday gardening or praying or like that kind of thing might be something they're really excited about. And for me, I had to learn to set a boundary there for myself and stop comparing or trying to just feel like because I was in some way using my work time towards it that was okay.
I think it's similar to boundaries around time, like Josh and I Sabbath, and that was so good for us. But we haven't always. But since we started doing that, that's something I think we've really learned we've needed to be able to be sustainable and be here for the long term. I think it's better to do 80% over a long period of time than 100% and then crash and burn out. So I think that's something we're accepting and leaning into. But in terms of other boundaries around even just on the estate, people ask for money, food, working out actually how do we not create dependencies in our community. Even with the gardening that we do, we support people with their gardens. How do we not do things for people that they could do themselves, and putting boundaries in around that in order to not create unhealthy dependencies. Definitely.
And I think there's as we've become more established and do run projects and things, and we're aware of organisations, it feels like that pressure has lessened a bit because we know how to signpost people well, and people know that we are involved in different things, and that we're not just there to kind of financially provide for people if they're in need or that kind of thing. Not that we ignore people's needs, but consider the best way to approach them. With a view of helping them in the long term.
With resilience as well, I wonder if there's something I'm really grateful for, our community times we've had together in the past, whether it's Celebrate First, or I think it's something so important about gathering together as a community, acknowledging the highs and the lows. And I know we've had times where when we used to do prayer and praise, I remember leading one on lament and just making space for us to lament the suicides that we had that year, or lament whatever was on our heart, or and I think being able to do that together, I think in terms of building resilience, has been really helpful, because it means that you have that support. And I think maybe in terms of resilience too, we do a lot of stuff in partnership with other organisations. I think that's helpful because there's always someone you can call if you're wobbly on a subject and you just need a bit of advice or wisdom. There's always someone who's got that, and you're never really on your own. So I think doing it together as a community, but together with our wider networks, has been helpful.
Most of us have got someone normally from the wider church who supports us, who isn't actively involved in much or anything that we do on the estate, but we can meet up with on a semi-regular basis, maybe once every month or two. And I think that's really helpful to, like, when you are finding something difficult within the community, to have someone to speak to outside of the community, and the things we're doing. I think generally just having a few spaces and places to take breaks from the estate. Like, we go on retreat as community to do that. But then, like, I definitely try and make time to join family holidays or go away and.
So you go on retreat twice a year?
Well, technically 3 getaways. So one is September, that's like our admin one, where we make decisions, we like talk about things that need talking about. So it's a lot more like worky, maybe.
Yeah, with some nice food to get us through.
It's like, and often because we have new members joining September, so for example, we usually allocate roles and they change every year, so everyone in Achor has responsibility for something. So I'm in charge of retreats, Ian's in charge of Cellar breakfast and
finances, festival church.
We all know our roles as well. So we kind of re-establish them every September. And then February we go away for a proper retreat. And then in May we join in with the Eden Project's proximity conference. Although there's only 3 of us going this year.
Not the Eden Garden Project.
No, have you come across them? And we keep talking about them. We're so sorry. They do like missional communities in deprived neighbourhoods. So we like tick their boxes, but the thing that we hold different is our inward life. So they would just, get a team of volunteers, get them houses on an estate and say, go. And they'd do what we're doing, but they wouldn't have maybe the shared values, the shared rhythms. So we kind of like link in with some of their stuff because it's really helpful, but I guess we're a little bit different to them in terms of the community we're trying to hold.
And they had a very historically, the message was very youth focused.
Yes, that's true.
So
and
then
we had all the old people at the beginning.
Their Eden teams were very youth focused, and I think they've started to diversify out a bit.
Yeah, they have.
Whereas we started less youth focused, and then have done bits and bobs of youth stuff
a bit of everything
over the years.
And in thinking back to how the Achor community relates to the King's Church community, are there ways in which the Achor community gets more involved with the church community, or how is that relationship?
So I guess with the leaders, our leaders meet with the church leaders on a semi-regular basis to chat through bigger picture things. In terms of like congregation, we have something called Achor Friends. So if people in the congregation are like particularly interested, they can sign up to get regular updates and prayer points from Leonie, our coordinator. And people are also welcome to our prayer meetings. So we have a few, not loads, but over the years it's been a number of people, maybe up to 10 people from the congregation who might pray regularly with us for a season of their life, and we've been really blessed by that. Or they might volunteer in our projects. So there's lots of ways people can be involved, formally or informally. And then one of our values as a community is like we submit to the leadership of Kings, and they do have a kind of say in our long-term vision. I guess we're under their umbrella, which we're grateful for their covering, because doing this without a church behind us would feel very difficult, I think. So we're really grateful for them kind of taking ownership of us, but then that does again come with its tensions and challenges.
And I guess in terms of so that we're not becoming clique outside of it, we are regular, I'm fairly sure if they're in Durham on a Sunday and we'll be at church on a Sunday morning.
We all serve on different teams, don't we?
I think if you took the average number of hours Achor people serve church, it's probably higher than the average number of congregations.
I think we're quite active in church life.
Yes, because the subset of people who are probably passionate about joining Achor are also very passionate about being involved in church. And I don't know whether at other points it has been more cliquey, but now because we are a spread of, still not a very wide range of ages, but we do spread a few,
decades.
Yeah, well, maybe a decade.
One
about
decade.
Well, I'm the youngest. Yeah, so it's about 10 years, I think.
Well, no,
but
Isabella's the youngest.
That's
She's
true.
only 18 months.
But then the older people had their friends that they were in church with, and they're still, if those people are still around, they're still friendly with them, and the younger people have their younger adult friends and mix in those groups. And the amount of time people can give to that probably varies on life stage, but I don't think it's a big problem.
No, I think everyone's quite active in church, aren't they? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of blessings, can we, in the form, I don't know whether you have any stories which you want to mention, or just reflecting on some of the things that have really blessed you as part of the Achor community.
I think I shared this when did I share this? Maybe our last team time. Yes, because we're reflecting on our family life value. We have a set of values that we hold together, and we reflect them on each month. But one of our values is like family life and committing to everything of those families. I'm just aware, having done most of my 20s in Achor and comparing it to my friends who haven't lived in community, like I've never really been lonely. Like, and I'm so grateful for that, because I think your 20s can be so lonely because you're figuring out what you want to do, where you want to live, you know, where you're going to put your roots down, what job you're going to do, maybe who you're going to be with for the rest of your life. Like all these massive life decisions you're making, but often in quite a lonely way. And actually in Achor, I'm sure I've had like little moments of feeling lonely, but I've never been properly lonely. Like I've always had like rich community around me, and I think that is such a blessing to have your 20s just lived out in the company of the people who are really like for you and want the best and want your flourishing, and that is just such a blessing to me. I'm really grateful for that. Ian has to think harder.
No, I had something, and like, then I got very caught up in what you were saying and was enjoying it.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
great. You just keep enjoying it.
I will just jump in and say that I think that's one of the really beautiful things about community, and especially for young adults, is that it provides that holding, doesn't it?
It does.
It's very critical stage.
Yeah, and so much around identity and just figuring out. You make decisions in your 20s that set your trajectory of where you're going to be for the next 50 years or longer or whatever.
And then when faith gets incorporated into
exactly.
that, it's huge.
Yeah, and then when you're praying through these big decisions with like friends that are committed to you, committed to your flourishing, committed to God's, committed to, you know, like a shared vision of where we're going. Like that's really a real blessing. Yeah, and rare. So I'm really grateful.
I think we've talked about it in various different bits, but what I'd kind of describe as the host-guest dynamics of hospitality that you have. And I think in this context, I'm thinking of when we're doing stuff with people outside, and how, as I've been part of it more, I've been able to be a guest as well as a host to the people, and like the different ways you might get served. And a lot of the time it's not them inviting you around to your house, but it's the ways that they might serve you if they're at your cell group or at or round for dinner or just hanging out. I think is something where like we lack that a lot in our culture generally. And like on Sunday when we had our Easter church service on the estate, like we just had like a whole host of different people from all sorts of backgrounds, people who were from quite broken family situations, like coming together and meeting people across different boundaries and being able to serve in different ways and participate in the church service. I think that just really excites me, and it feels like it's just going to keep growing, and that's what I think church should be about, that kind of mixture of people serving in different ways from different backgrounds. Seeing that in different ways is cool.
And the people in this estate have just like blessed us so much. Like you move and think, oh, I'm going to be a blessing. But then we've got a neighbour who very sadly, she passed away earlier this year, but like she never forgot wedding anniversary, and she'd bring flowers round. And then our other neighbour would competitively notice the flowers and bring flowers on as well. But it's like, how amazing to have neighbours that will remember our wedding anniversary every year. Or there's a mum who comes to our cell group who I just find the most inspiring person, and she's like agreed to mentor me in like parenting because she just parents her kids so beautifully. I'm like, but I would have never met her had I not lived here, because our paths would have been so different. But she's been through all sorts of challenge, and because of that she's beautiful, like she's a diamond, and I just want to like squeeze all of the wisdom out of her for my life. But like I would have never never met her and never been this close to her had I never lived here. And you just receive so much, don't you, from the people around you. Like our neighbours forever, I mentioned like just bringing around clothes or toys for the baby, and like we're just so blessed, like living in this community. It's a good place to be.
I think internally, like I guess earlier I was talking about COVID and how I was like, when the lockdowns happened, I was here, and that was a point where I was like, I definitely need community. When I eventually caught COVID last June or July or whatever, like I was very fortunate that I'd had lots of vaccines and really didn't feel it at all, but still had to do the isolation. But then like everyone was offering to bring food round, and at that point you were able to sit in the garden with different people. So I think I like got to see as many people just in a slightly different way as I would normally, like, so I didn't have to really go through that isolation again. And that was both from people who are part of the wider church, definitely people who are part of Achor, and then like people who like aren't part of Achor but live on this estate. Like I remember one of the mums calling me up and being like, can I bring you around some dinner? But I didn't need any because everyone had already provided for me so much, but it was still fun.
Yeah. But it is family though, and I think like my family are, well, they're in Cumbria, so not too far, but they're not on my doorstep. But Achor is, and when like we welcome Bobby into our family, like you guys cooked us meals for days, and then we were all ill, and you cooked us meals for days. And even like when I'm back to work, like Bobby's looked after by an Achor member on a Monday, and it's almost like having a sister look after, like his auntie or someone, because he's someone he's so familiar with, he really likes her. Like it's as good as family, and that has been such a blessing, definitely.
And my final question is very much a follow-on question. I'm kind of calling this podcast Dwelling Place in the recognition that, at least for me, I feel like God dwells in a very special place in community. So how would you answer the question of where you found God dwelling in the Achor community?
I think it definitely follows on from what I was saying a couple of minutes ago. I love the kind of verses that Jesus tells when he's like, where were you when I was hungry? Where were you when I was thirsty? And that idea that somehow Jesus is present in the people we're serving, and just in that, as you're doing that with people. And I think being in community and serving each other and being served by others and reaching out more generally and blessing people, I think is just, and receiving, like all those dynamics going on where you receive it and you give it, and in it Jesus just seems to be present.
On that, the phrase that comes to my mind is like, in the calm and in the chaos. Like I really have experienced God profoundly praying in that conservatory in your house over the years, when it's calm and like we've worshipped and it's peaceful and it's still. This is before we had children in the community. And you just sense God's peace and his presence with us as we breathe in. But then also in the chaos of like a Friday morning when like, was it just last week we were looking at the cross and you could literally just see women like figuring it, like, you know, when you can just see a penny dropping, we're like, oh, I totally get this one thing about Jesus. Or in those moments where it's like quite chaotic and you've kind of got to have an eye to like the two children running around, this deep moment happening, like the bacon's burning, whatever's going on. But in the chaos, like God is so there and just so at work. So I think in the calm and the chaos for me.
Oh, thank you. I think I've exhausted all my questions.
Oh no, it's fun to chat about it.
Thank you so much.